On the wedding night, the woman who had just joined the royal family was forced to play a real-life game of escape with her in-laws. What happened? The woman was named Grace. She had fair skin and a beautiful face, but she came from a modest background. Growing up in a lively family, she had never imagined that she would become a real-life gray maiden until 18 months ago, when Grace met Alex, a handsome and wealthy heir. Money wasn't the key. What mattered more was her deep love for him, which made Grace fall head over heels. The two of them quickly grew closer, and eventually started talking about marriage. Due to the marriage, Alex, who had previously run away from home, had to bring Grace back to his rich and magnificent family. The Five Treasures, a family with a long history of wealth and power, which had already become a giant in the entertainment industry during the Civil War. But in the face of all this, Grace was inevitably a bit nervous about the difference in status and the social challenges she would face at the wedding. Not long after, Alex's brother Daniel came to the room and warned her to run away before it was too late. He didn't think Grace was suited for the family. She thought he simply disliked her and didn't take Daniel's words to heart. Then Alex seriously suggested running away from the family, but Grace, eager to win the family's approval, especially her mother-in-law's, dismissed the idea. Despite the romantic and warm wedding scene, and despite the strange looks she noticed, Grace didn't think too much of it. She thought it might be her humble background that made the family reluctant to accept her. After all, the relationships within such powerful families were often complex, so her suspicions seemed justified. But then on the night of the wedding, an unexpected event occurred, just as the young couple was preparing to leave their house. While they were spending time together, Aunt Helene appeared at the door and asked them to go to the parlor immediately. Alex explained to Grace that according to the family tradition, the bride had to take part in a game at midnight, which was even more important than the wedding itself. Only by winning the game could she be recognized as a member of the family by its elders. Grace instinctively refused the offer. But then she remembered that she was marrying into an exotic family that owned an ancient castle. Considering this, it didn't seem too unreasonable for her to participate in the game. The rules of the game required the bride to draw a card from a small heirloom box and follow the instructions on the card, which could be any kind of board game or amusement game. According to Alex, the family had accumulated great wealth through these games, and it was a tradition to maintain good relations within the family. When they arrived in the living room, Grace was surprised to find that the entire family seemed to be eagerly awaiting her, so much so that even Daniel's sister Emily and her husband, Humpty Dumpty, who had left their marriage, had taken a private plane overnight to join the fun. 5 minutes before the start of the game, Alex's father, Tony, led the group into a secret room. It was the portrait of a man holding a shotgun that caught Grace's attention, revealing that it was Alex's great-grandfather, Victor, and that the family was in the midst of a game because of the arrival of the newcomer. Tony began to tell the story of the family. Many years ago, Victor was just a poor sailor who lived a hard life. However, he met Mr. LaBelle, a collector, on a ship. Both of them were interested in games of chance. LaBelle made a bet with Victor using a mysterious box, saying that if Victor opened the box before the ship docked, he would support Victor's decision. Ultimately, Victor won the bet, and through LaBelle's investment, Victor was able to amass considerable wealth on his own. His business was a great success, and over the generations, the family's wealth grew significantly. In the early days, when a new member joined the family, an empty poker card was added to the wooden box, and the new member had to draw for the next game. Daniel's wife's sister-in-law revealed that when she married into the family, she drew chess, and Humpty Dumpty drew checkers. When Grace drew her card, she laughed easily upon seeing the words on it, hide and seek. But when she noticed the serious expressions on everyone's faces, she realized the game wasn't what she had expected. The rules were simple. The mansion's windows and doors would be locked, the cameras turned off, and Grace would have to hide for the rest of the night without being found by any family member. As soon as the game began, Tony handed out various weapons, from guns to axes to spears, arrows, and crossbows, all in a combat-ready stance. This was not a traditional game of hide-and-seek, but more like a life-or-death battle. Alex sat on a chair, worried, while his mother urged him to stay calm and avoid sudden movements. Grace, on the other side of the room, knew nothing about the game's true nature, and thought it was just an ordinary game. To finish the game, she hid in the kitchen of the mansion. However, when there was no movement outside for a long time, Grace got bored and left her hiding spot. Hearing footsteps, she thought it was the young master and ran to check the bedroom. But then Alex appeared, covering Grace's mouth and dragging her back into the room. As Alex was about to reveal the truth to Grace, Neo suddenly walked in, forcing them to hide at the end of the bed. Just then there was a sound outside the door, and as Neo passed by, he was shot in the head. The sound of the gunshot was immediately followed by the screams of Amelie, who mistook Neo for Grace. At that moment, Grace realized the true meaning of the game. It was a contest of lives. Tony and the other men arrived shortly after, looking for Grace. Through their conversation, Grace learned that they were planning to sacrifice him. This revelation made him understand why Alex had run away from home. Years ago, Victor and the mysterious Mr. Leper had made a pact. In exchange for wealth, they had to sacrifice the winner of the game of hide-and-seek to Victor, or else they would lose all their riches, and their family would be cursed. The realization crushed Grace. He confronted Alex, questioning why he had brought him back to participate in this deadly game. Alex, in a moment of despair, explained that no one had ever drawn the card that Grace did, and he never imagined that Grace would be the one to pull it. Alex also told Grace that the only way to survive was to continue playing the game. If Grace chose to give up, the consequences would be disastrous. Alex recounted how his uncle and father hadn't survived the night after making similar mistakes, and now their family was on the brink of destruction. However, the noise from their argument caught the attention of the fat brother downstairs. As the weakest member of the family, he was only concerned with protecting himself and was hesitant to act. Meanwhile, Grace, desperate to escape, tore off part of her skirt and prepared to flee, but as soon as she stepped out of the room, she encountered Aunts Pawnee, Danielle, and Herring, who had been watching the house closely. Sister had perhaps turned her back on 10 boxes of Nellie Washington's guns and was blinded by the sudden change of events. Grace could only turn and run, seizing the opportunity to hide in the catch room, but she soon realized that the windows were shut and the telephone was dead. Just as she began to sink into despair, Danielle entered the room. Danielle couldn't change them. She gave Grace 10 seconds to escape. When Tony and the others arrived, Grace had already vanished without a trace. Knowing that Emily had lost her gun, Humpty Dumpty wasted no time in giving her his crossbow. In the next moment, another innocent maid was tragically knocked off by Emily's careless handling. This twist in the family's tragic heirloom story gripped the crowd with suspense. Paradox came up with a daring plan: use a maid to impersonate Grace, the only person who had ever been inside the family house. Auntie, however, was adamant that the bride, Grace, must take priority. She stressed that the task must be completed before sunrise, or the whole family risked being wiped out. There, she found a chain gun once used by Victor Tiernanen and prepared to escape through the back of the kitchen. Just as she was about to make her move, the housekeeper unexpectedly appeared. Grace, with a surge of courage, tried to fire the gun, but the bullets were fake. In frustration, she grabbed a kettle and smashed it into a picture frame. Meanwhile, Tony entered the control room and discovered that Alex had sabotaged the security system. A fight broke out between them, and only after Danielle struck Alex did he finally let go. But being too young and inexperienced, Alex seized the opportunity, knocked Tony down, and tied him up. The maid in the lift, with innocent eyes and a trembling voice, begged Grace for help, claiming ignorance, and Grace, out of sympathy, promised to assist her escape from the perilous situation. However, the maid betrayed her by calling out to alert her master of Grace's presence. In the ensuing chaos, Grace accidentally triggered the lift switch, leading to the maid's tragic decapitation. Grace tried to escape by jumping out of the window but fell into a vast garden. As she ran through the darkness, a flickering flashlight appeared in the distance. Fearing exposure, Grace hid in a sheepfold, but the young master soon found her and shot her through the palm. In a fit of rage, Grace knocked him out but then fell into a deep pit filled with rotting smells, buzzing flies, and scattered white bones. Fighting back terror and pain, she climbed a wooden ladder, but just as she neared escape, a nail pierced her left hand. Gritting her teeth, she pulled it out, wrapped her wound in dirty gauze, and continued on. However, her attempts to escape were interrupted by Sister Shorts, who missed her shot but ordered the housekeeper to stop Grace with a car, leading to a desperate chase. The liquid-drinking family member fled to the door and managed to stop a passing car, but he was utterly disappointed by the owner's indifference and callousness, who not only failed to offer help, but also spoke harshly to Grace. As he watched the car go by through the window, Grace's anger and despair reached their peak. Then the housekeeper chased him in his car, and he ran into the woods, trying to find a way out. After a fierce struggle, Grace finally managed to strangle the housekeeper. He then got into the car and tried to escape from this horrifying place. When the car started, the first thing that came to Grace's mind was to call the police, but to his surprise, the car was modified, and the alarm system didn't alert the authorities. Instead, it automatically disconnected the car's communication system. Just when Grace was in a predicament, the housekeeper woke up, shoved a gun at him from behind, and then shot at him. A drunken chicken was shot into Grace's body, and his consciousness gradually faded. In a hallucination, he seemed to see Alex coming to take him away from all this, but it was only an illusion. Meanwhile, the butler was triumphantly reporting the results of the battle to the men in the inn, unaware that Grace had regained consciousness. During the struggle, the car went out of control, leading to an accident that killed the butler. Although Daniel couldn't intervene directly, he couldn't resist knocking Tony unconscious as he secretly watched. When Grace woke up again, he found himself tied to a table in a secret room by his mother-in-law's family. The ceremony was about to begin, with the family seated at the table in robes, chanting incantations and invoking the secret liquid from the bottle. Tony, with a sword in his hand, was about to poison Grace when the unexpected happened. Instead, they all vomited black blood from their mouths, indicating that they had been poisoned. The poisoner was Danielle, who used a small amount of poison that was not fatal. While everyone was busy trying to cope with the poisoning crisis, Danielle escaped from the secret room with Grace. However, they didn't get far before Sister Duanfa chased after them. To execute her plan, she personally ended her husband's life. Danielle collapsed on the snowy slopes, barely clinging to life. In the midst of the struggle, the short-haired sister decided to attack the girl, and Daniel urged Grace to quickly escape from the scene. But the escape wasn't easy. Just as Grace resolved one crisis, she encountered Tony. Without hesitation, she struck him with an oil lamp, which, when it fell to the ground, lit the curtains and started a fire. Then came the battle of the brace girdles, where the two women found themselves locked in an unusual situation. At this critical moment, Grace grabbed the wooden box from the table and threw it at her mother-in-law, striking her until she fell silent. Meanwhile, Alex, who had been bound, was finally freed from her restraints. Upon seeing Daniel, who was badly wounded, she was filled with despair and couldn't accept the reality that her doubts and pain couldn't be expressed in words. Grace was bewildered and helpless in the face of Alex's accusations. He never imagined that the man he loved so dearly would still be grappling with questions of right and wrong under such dire circumstances. The defenseless Grace was easily overpowered by Alex, and then cooled down at the table by the crowd. This time, Tony's role was taken over by Alex as the enforcer. However, Grace's tenacious resistance kept him fighting for his life, and the sword did not pierce his heart as expected. With the sire bond broken and the heavenly gift of the dawn offering incomplete, Auntie could only offer forgiveness to the devil's chair in the face of impending death. Fear filled the hearts of the crowd. While everyone thought the end was near and stood still, the curse of the family prevailed. Despite her fear, Auntie did not give up. She raised her axe and struck Grace 12 times. The earth's flesh gulped hard, and Auntie exploded into a sheet of gore and flesh. Then the rest of the Aryans suffered one by one. Each of the other areas fell into a trance, and the people looked at each other, unable to turn away from the explosion's aftermath. Seeing this, Grace couldn't help but let out an uncontrollable laugh. Alex was still pleading for Grace's forgiveness, but it was too late. Grace, in a moment of clarity, decided to end the marriage. Alex's fate was to meet the same end as the rest of the family. The story concludes with Grace in her blood-colored dowry. At the end of the story, Grace, dressed in her blood-colored dowry, lights a cigarette and smokes it desperately to the sound of soft music.